pandemic. This session is, again, very timely, and we have a wonderful presenter here in Mike Robitaille from Deloitte. He's worked in marketing at Labatt's Breweries, at multinational ad agencies throughout Canada. He has founded one of the fastest growing ad agencies in Canada, and today he is committed to helping business leaders create the ultimate competitive advantage. More people cheering for their companies to win. And his focus is doing that through Canada's first and only purpose and momentum group at Deloitte. You saw on the video, Deloitte ISAAC, ISAAC. Mike's with us today to speak about the importance of being a purpose-driven organization and what the new expectations are for business leaders, no matter what type of organization you are in. He will discuss the great risk of being left behind or being regarded as an old guard business. And that is a risk in this era of tech-empowered and stakeholder capitalism. As well, we're all dealing with kind of a fog and fatigue of purpose, and it's something that we need to address directly. There is a clear pattern for leaders to follow to earn stakeholder trust, staff trust, customer trust, belief and enthusiasm in this upended social landscape. So, Mike, welcome to the Brampton Board of Trade. We're really looking forward to your timely and insightful message today. Sir, the podium is yours.
Thanks so much, Todd. Thanks for that great introduction. And hello, everyone. So great to be talking to you today. I'm just going to share my screen so we can have something more entertaining than me to look at. And maybe, Todd, if you can just give me a thumbs up to let me know that perfect. All right, I'm going to minimize that screen and we'll get into it. So as Todd mentioned, first of all, I do appreciate people making time to talk about this subject matter today, because there is, I would say, some fatigue around the topic of corporate philosophy, right? A company's vision, mission, purpose, values, these things that aren't the products we make or the services we provide, but really the motivation behind the company. And so while it's marvelous that over the last 5 years in particular, there's been a great deal of conversation about, how do I become a good company? The reason there's some fatigue is because a lot of companies have invested a lot of time and money with not significant return against that investment. Like there are 86% of companies that actually say, yeah, we've got a purpose statement. Only 18% of them are actually saying it's done anything. And even those 18% aren't actually saying it's really turned their company into some phenomenal success that they didn't think it could have been otherwise. So, not to be wildly arrogant and suggest we've got the new playbook for business, but, business does really appreciate patterns to follow. And so I'm hoping that's what we can do in our time together today, is actually just talk about, like, what is that pattern that we can start to follow to help our companies better exist and thrive, for sure. But like a lot of companies, if you do a bit of a word count over the last 18 months, unprecedented was one of the most popular words of early COVID, but unprecedented and systemic are two of the other words that when you do sort of a Google word count over the last 18 months, these themes, which are by their very nature, enormous, right? Like existential crises and systemic crises are quite different things. So what is that pattern as we appreciate the massive change that's happening in our social landscape? What's the role for companies, and what's a pattern we might start to follow? We do have, it's important that we actually start to create a bit of a new lexicon. Purpose is a wonderful word, but at the same time, it's a question that really big brains have been struggling to crack. Purpose, meaning of life. There is no one answer that enormous intellects have tilted against over the last 3,000-4,000 years. So purpose is a great word, but it does lend itself to ambiguity. What we're talking about now really are, we the dividing line really is we had 60 years of shareholder primacy and a playbook that said, if we're here to make money, that's the sole purpose of business. And really because the power structure in society allowed that playbook to rule, to define the rules of the game and the goalposts of success. We were all companies for shareholders. If you sort of wind our collective mind back 10 years and think of the vision statements, mission statements, or philosophies of most companies, like we all had some version of, we exist to maximize shareholder value by selling quality product at a reasonable price and serve the communities in which we work. We were all saying maximize shareholder value, and that was the game. And really our stakeholders, the public, customers, allies, didn't have much of a recourse. We say companies for the people because that is the power shift. Tech empowered public was a term that Todd mentioned in the introduction. And that is a contributor to this profound shift that's happening in society. Even though that the video that we played off the top feels very timely in this, very palpable public health crisis that we're in the midst of. I started this firm, this practice in just after 2008, after the financial crisis started to expose this chasm that was opening up in society. And there were two sentiments that had been percolating in society, big business maybe not being the best force for the world, and capitalism feeling as though it had lost its way. And in 2008, those sentiments quite fully erupted, but the financial crisis wasn't deep enough or long enough to actually make people feel like the status quo really needed to change. Then you have Occupy in 2011, Facebook hits 1 billion users in 2012, and this chasm starts to widen. And so, we do say, there's one question as this chasm grows deeper and wider, there's going to be one question that really starts to define winners from losers. And they call it the old way and the new way. And it's, are you fighting for a change people wish to see in the world? Is your company organized and using its expertise and resources and influence to actually help society get to the other side of this chasm? Or are you going to be regarded as someone defending the way it was? And we've put some characteristics here on the left-hand side of this chasm, sort of they call it the previous mega cycle from the 1970s to the 2010s, some of the characteristics that sort of defined the way it was. And then 2020 and the next era, and some of the characteristics that are sort of shaping this next era, this next economic mega cycle. There are two inexorable forces that are widening this chasm. So one is the millennial Gen Z group, which is sort of came together as the we generation. It's 45% of the North American population. As you can tell from recent elections, that group is now maturing as it ages, and with every year it sort of ages as a cohort, and it's getting very close to full electoral power. So at 45% of the population, not, it's people, I'm not sure what the low end of the age range is, but as a generation, it's not all fully over the age of 18, but it's hitting a point of electoral power. So, it's an inexorable force because it's not a homogenous group. They don't act as a full 100% block, but as we'll see on the next slide, they actually do have super majority opinions, very significant majority opinions on the change they want to see brought about in the world. And so as it grows, gains electoral power, has a very clear idea of what it wants the world to look like, it's going to start electing administrations that are there to actually fulfill that mandate. So the we generation is one of these inexorable forces. And then it has access to something that no generation in the history of humankind has had, which is a technology or a mechanism to organize very, very quickly in favor of the things it supports and against the things it doesn't want to support. So that, the thing that is driving this chasm deeper and wider and rapidly is that, in that period on the left-hand side, 1970 to the late 2010s, really corporations and institutions, it didn't have absolute power in society, but there wasn't really a lot that stood in our way. If maybe frame it this way, if someone, just a regular citizen, didn't like the conduct of a company, the really only recourse an individual had was to write a strongly worded letter to an MP, to a media outlet, or to the president of the company. But very rarely did that manifest itself in true opposition or something that would either create economic value erosion or operational complexity for a company. Now, today, like all it takes is, one incident. So between the internet offering people unfettered access to information and social media allowing people to organize really quickly in numbers, you can go from one employee, one customer. Oh, I apologize. That's a landline that is at an untimely way interrupting. It just has a couple more rings. Oh, that is not a tech-enabled public. That's not digital in any way. My apologies. So what all of this is doing is making this, what's the role for companies to move from, really having sort of an exclusive group we cared about to really saying, how do we actually organize our companies to bring about a change people want to see in the world? And what are those changes people are wanting to see? These are just a couple of things. And it's important to appreciate, when we first started our practice in 2009, this chasm was not nearly as significant. That video that we produced 5 years ago was not quite as timely, but I think we all appreciate that this tectonic shift, this chasm, is absolutely the moment we're in right now. I'm not going to go through all of these statistics, but if you just run your eye quickly down the list, the point is this millennial Gen Z group has a very cohesive sense of the world it wants to bring about. And it's forcing us to actually look at things that we weren't looking at 5 years ago. If you just draw your eye down to this third stat from the bottom, 79% of Canadians favoring a wealth tax and 84% for a subset of that millennial Gen Z group. That's a survey that's a subject we weren't surveying 5 years ago because we didn't actually think it was an issue. And now 80% of Canadians, and disproportionately so among that we generation, are actually saying, yes, a wealth tax. So we wealth equality, racial equality, gender equality, climate change, of course, this public health crisis. We're in a midst of cumulative systemic crises. And this millennial Gen Z group is incredibly active in wanting to get us to a new place. And there was a survey by the World Economic Forum in September of last year that I think really just, fully offers us that bullseye statistic. So there was a survey of, excuse me for a second. A survey, 27 different countries, over 20,000 people. And among the conclusions was this one, which was 86% of people want the world to change significantly and become more sustainable and equitable, and don't go back to the way it was before the COVID-19 crisis started. So to have, roughly 9 in 10 people agree on anything these days, and at any time for that matter, is remarkable. That you have 9 in 10 people actually saying it's time for the status quo to be disrupted, it's time for the status quo to be sort of broken and rebuilt, is truly remarkable, because generally you have, somewhere between 25 and 40% of a population being really comfortable with the status quo and not wanting our way of living to change. Now you actually have the majority of the population saying, look, let's use this crisis and let's do something with it. And so maybe just to, blow some of the fog away, because again, philosophy can be a, very long, drawn out, circular conversation that some don't feel leads anywhere necessarily. And so if we just say, what is the thing we're trying to do? It was entirely right, call it in the traditional way, in the old way, in the previous mega cycle, for companies to say, we care about the success of our company. And no one was really in a position of power to question that or to say, actually, I think you should care about anything else. And so business really was allowed to say, look, EBITDA growth per quarter, that's what motivates us. And it was okay. It was okay in the sense of no one really raised an opposition to it. Today, because that power has dramatically shifted to the people, of course, people will acknowledge that you're a business. So of course you do care about the success of your company. But as people, what do you really care about? And so to come up with a good answer to, as people, yes, as a business, we care about the success of our company, of course, but as people, we genuinely care about a change we can help bring about in the world. Do you have a really good answer to that? And so I would say the very positive thing is, that 86% of companies have stated a purpose. The majority of those, and we see a lot of, call it, let's say, first run attempts at purpose. And most companies are essentially saying, we have a purpose beyond profit, but their statement of it is, we're here to help Canadians live better lives, or we're here to, help make a better world. If you use the adjective better, that's great that you actually want to be a positive contributor. You want to help sort of get society to the other side. But unless you have a specific change that you want to help bring about in the world, your organization is really going to struggle to say, okay, it's great that we want to be better, but what is that better thing? Like, what is that change we're going to try to help bring about in the world? And so that's where, hopefully, for the balance of our time, we'll get to, some specific tools and patterns that you can actually start to employ to better answer that question in a way that truly, not only is it specific, it provides a specific sense of that change you think you can help bring about in the world, but it's going to help you sort of stand for it in a way that's inspiring, and it's going to help you start to embed and implement and prove it, which is, as important as it is to inspire people, you need to back it up with conduct and action and communications that actually help them see that change being made manifest. So, one of the things that is really helpful as a starting point, because this doesn't have to be a, getting your leadership team together in a, gathered at a 3-day offsite to discover your inner company. Like, it doesn't have to be a sort of a deeply spiritual exercise with a shaman leader, to make it really a very executive friendly process, and something that's much more, let's call it, rooted in research. There are 18 human ideals. So when if you start by saying, what is the change people want to see brought about in the world? If that's what I want to make my company an agent of, to bring about some change people want to see in the world, what is that change? And so there was a social psychologist who sort of first postulated, this theory that there are human ideals, things that human beings, regardless of age, sex, culture, or creed, all human beings want. And he came up with this list in 1973. We've since replicated and validated it quantitatively. And those are the numbers you see on the bar graph here. But the reason these are 18 really, really helpful, powerful, inspiring starting points for companies that want to reimagine their companies as companies for the people. So if you try to put the phrase, I don't want, if you try to actively reject any of these 18 concepts, so I don't want family security. I don't want to take care of my loved ones, essentially. Or, I don't want a world of peace. I don't want friendship. I don't want accomplishment. I don't want self-respect. I don't want any of these 18 things. As a good human being, right? Unless you're a sociopath or a psychopath, you can't reject these things. Like, all of us are, through culture and learning and, the 108 billion human lives that have lived before us, we've learned that these 18 things actually just make for either a good life or a better world. And characteristics for a good life or a better world are essentially, like, when you boil down philosophy and purpose and meaning, those are the two dominant themes for what give people a sense of purpose, because it's going to create a good life for me, or it's going to create a better world for all of us. These 18 ideals are those characteristics. What makes them an invaluable place to start for leaders who actually want to set their organizations upon this path is no human being can achieve any one of these on their own. So again, if you just run your eye down this list, there isn't any one of these as an individual you can bring about on your own. So when you look at social movements, when people have organized together to bring about change, one of these human ideals is in operation. So whether it's a social movement, the election of a charismatic leader with a platform, or French Revolution, Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité, or the American Revolution with E pluribus unum. I don't think that phrase was actually part of the American Revolution, but, or when you look at companies that have led social movements, and that's really the pattern we're going to talk about today. There are companies that have, yes, they've sold a ton of stuff and they're ridiculously valuable global entities for the most part, but they actually created social movements behind their organizations because they act as agents of helping bringing about one of these human ideals. So again, these 18 things, 18 concepts, they're incredibly powerful because we all want them and they're hard to get, and we need to cooperate to bring them about. So just to show you a couple of examples, of these companies for the people that have actually done it. So, when you look at organizations like Nike, Apple, Starbucks, Southwest Airlines, Harley Davidson, Lululemon, Ben and Jerry's back in the day, or Body Shop back in the day, or Patagonia, like, there are these companies that really conform to a very, very different pattern of success than most everyone else. And when you deconstruct them, we have I think a tendency in business to dismiss the things we don't fully understand as, oh, that's just warm and fuzzy, or a matter of luck and good fortune. And it's easy and perhaps tempting to say, well, Nike was lucky to have Phil Knight, Starbucks was lucky to have Howard Schultz, Apple was lucky to have Steve Jobs, Herb Keller and Southwest Airlines and Yvon Chouinard and so on. And you were just lucky to have one of those charismatic leader types. But actually, it's not a variable, it's a constant. Every time one of these companies comes along and it captures the public imagination, and it it ends up with employees that can't stop talking about what a great company they work at. It ends up with customers who, to the graphic on the far left side of this, tattoo a logo of a company on their body because it actually represents the ideals that they can't articulate themselves. So when this fire of a founder, the fire of a leader, there's always some weirdo in the wilderness who believes that the world can be better, is not terribly encumbered by the reality, right? Like when you think about these phrases, the reality is, or it is what it is. We have a lot of phrases that reinforce the status quo is intractable. Founders don't actually feel encumbered that way, right? They are very eager, very idealistic, and want to actually see the world made better in some way. And so that fire of a founder, that an individual believes that change can be brought about in the world, is an invaluable and necessary starting point. And then to unify an organization, as human beings, we're all relatively helpless to bring about the change we'd like to see in the world, because we don't have a lot of power individually. But when we see a big, powerful company with resources and influence and expertise, and when we can, experience it in a store or through a product or online, and we can experience that change, we actually start to think that those human ideals that we thought were desirable but really hard to get just might be possible. And so what these companies do in having the idealism of a founder that's proven in everything that a company says and does, where people can see evidence, we're very quick to join in. We're very quick to get behind these companies and say, okay, I love what your company's about. How can I be a part of it? They have, the highest trust, support, and enthusiasm rankings of any organization. So again, very different pattern. So just to play a couple of these out, if you look at Starbucks, Howard Schultz, I would say somewhat famously, when he first bought a couple of roasteries, he went over to Italy, saw these espresso bars and said, oh my God, like Italy has these places where people congregate. They spend like 2-3 hours, sometimes talking to their neighbors, sometimes just, spending time on their own, but they have like a third place. They've got a place for just me time. And in North America, we have home, a first place, work, a second place, but we don't have this third place. I want to create that third place. And as much as we want to sort of bemoan sort of the, Starbucks for charging $3 for a cup of black coffee, it exists for a reason that is so much more than coffee. Their purpose statement isn't Starbucks exists to create a better world, something vague. They're here to nurture and inspire the human spirit, one cup, one person, one neighborhood at a time. They are shrines to individuality. If you look at the collection of Starbucks baristas that you've encountered over your lifetime, it's an incredibly diverse workforce, not just from race and gender identity, but piercings and tattooing and attire and it is. And as customers, you walk in and it doesn't matter how, call it ridiculous and individualistic your order may be, you can set the temperature, no foam, more foam, less foam. Like they want to celebrate the individual. And importantly, like when they first came in, like most restaurants and coffee shops for sure said, buy a coffee, leave in 15 minutes. Starbucks said, buy a coffee, stay as long as you want, because that's what we're here to do. And so when organizations come along and they actually say, you know what, I love this place because it actually celebrates me as an individual. And we have both sort of a private sector and a public sector example of each of these human ideals, just to show that, when an organization and a leader in particular comes up and says, like, I want to be a force for freedom. I want to be a force for the individual. These are the things that actually capture the public imagination and get people to join in support. And it is, really important to, when you're looking at these companies, appreciate that they haven't relied on, call it conventional mechanisms of demand creation. Like aside from Nike, where is the great ad campaign that made Starbucks, that made Harley Davidson, that made Patagonia? Like, these companies actually didn't rely on expensive methods of demand creation. They relied on people, right? Like, with customers and employees, on all of these, call it stakeholders, that said, you have to try this company. If you're going to buy a new computer, you have to buy an Apple. If you're going to buy a motorcycle, you have to buy a Harley Davidson, because people start to evangelize the good that they see these companies bringing about in the world. And Apple, it's very easy for us to sort of say, well, they've just figured out the technology game. They have better graphic user interfaces. It's easy to sort of look at the observable characteristics of these companies and say that's why they're winning. But really, it is these underlying ideals, these underlying changes that they're bringing about in the world that really they're responsible for creating the movement, the social momentum of it. One of the most case studied companies in business schools is Southwest Airlines. And much of what gets talked about there is the sort of disruptive aspect of the role they played in the industry, and reinventing ticketing systems, single model aircraft, so their supply chain was streamlined. But when Herb Kelleher, their founder, was interviewed, he said, like, my competitors can copy anything they can see. What they can't see is how people feel about my company. And I want everyone, my customers, my employees, to feel as though they're part of a crusade. And the crusade that he articulated was before he started Southwest Airlines, he said, people shouldn't have to take 30-hour bus rides to visit the ones they love. It should be affordable for all of us to fly. And so, like, these companies, not only do they talk about the change that we want to see in the world, they really do make it happen. Like, before Southwest Airlines, flying was a luxury commodity, a luxury product. Only 15% of Americans pre-Southwest Airlines were able to afford to set foot on a plane. And now it's over 85%. Nike, if you think about personal fitness, like, if you Google 1970s tracksuit, like, they were made of velour, they were leisure suits. Like, we really didn't have personal fitness routines until Nike came along and said, if you have a body, you can be an athlete. If you have a body, if you push it, you'll be amazed at what it's capable of if you just do it. So these human ideals, like, if you look at the pattern behind social movements, uniting people behind a shared ideal is the starting point, and it needs to be bound up. If a leader has conviction in that ideal, we're very quick as first followers, as employees or as executive teams, to rally around that leader and say, look, I believe in that change that you want to bring about in the world. How can I be a part of it? And, I think we all, having gone through a federal election in our country, we appreciate, like, when leaders get behind a podium and they start telling us the things they think we want to hear, they start talking about change, but you can tell they're actually just saying it, right? Their strategy teams have told them this is what you need to say. But we are, as human beings, our antenna are very sensitive to whether someone truly believes something or whether it's kind of fake, right? And like, the word authenticity is quite a popular word of late. And really, that's what it's getting at. Like, if the leader doesn't believe in this change, your first followers aren't going to believe either, right? You're not going to get other people to want to join, call it your crusade, as Herb Kelleher called it, if you, as the founder of that movement, don't believe yourself. Emboldening first followers is a critical step, right? So, what's the difference between a weirdo in the wilderness with an idea for a good life, a better world? It's a second person saying, actually, that idea is not so silly. I think it's a good idea. And then the third person says that, and so on. And like the proverbial snowball, it starts to roll downhill. Quite critically, you can't just say you believe in a change that we want to see in the world. You do need to stand up to some issue that us regular helpless human beings haven't been able to overcome despite confronting it. So how do you actually stand up to something that was persistent, that actually says, you're going to put your money where your mouth is, and you're going to actually help change something that people have wanted to see changed? That's standing up to a systemic issue. A thing that we don't do particularly well in business is you don't have to do it on your own, right? Like, we do talk about, we want to own that territory, and we're quite eager to aggregate credit to our organizations. But if you embrace this social movement notion. You're going to realize one of the best ways to accelerate the momentum of a social movement is to earn the support, not just of individuals, but of other powerful, resourced, influential organizations. Because if they get behind it too, it's going to be beneficial to their company, but it's also going to greatly benefit you as the founder of this movement. Creating waves of enthusiasm is something we're actually quite good at in business. Like if something's great, well, how do we add more fireworks to it? How do we add momentum to it? How do we do more of it? Can we, like, wave 5 is the easiest of the waves in a social movement. Unfortunately, we tend to want to rush to wave 5 without having done the hard work of the first 4. So if you distill this new pattern down, if you were to say, what was the old way to win? It was, make a product, sell a product, collect the money for it, spend as little as we can in the process, right? Like that was the last 60 years, and we quite perfected, sophisticated the heck out of that. But it's coming to an end. This next way to win, which is really to appreciate that technology has shifted power to the general public and to stakeholders. So unless you actually start to fight for a change they want to see in the world, it's going to be very difficult for you to sort of succeed in this new era. So the 3 points in this pattern really are: stand for something great, make your company an instrument for a human ideal, for a good life, for a better world. How do you actually play an instrumental role in helping people toward one of those things? You do need to prove it in everything you say and do. So there is hard and real work of making sure that if you do stand for something, people need to see it not just in some corporate affairs led CSR program. They can't just see it in a branding effort. They can't just see it in isolated act for your employees. They do need to see that human idealism in everything you say and do. And today, because of unfettered access through information, they can see everything we say and do. So it was entirely understandable in complex organizations that we farmed these pieces out, right? We said to leaders, you have vision, mission, and LRP. We said to HR, you've got culture and the employee. We said to marketing, you've got customer and the brand. And we broke these things up. They do need to come together again, because if you look at that cluster of companies that we mentioned, those social movement companies, there is no difference between how they talk to it. They have a common thread that they use in communicating and acting with all of their stakeholders. You do these 2 things really well, and you unlock the greatest competitive advantage there is, which is people will help you win. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but it's just to sort of, I would say, reassure you that the act of operationalizing purpose is not an inconsequential task. There is real work. Like once you have said, we do want to embrace a more idealistic, we want to bring about a change people want to see in the world. Like once you cross that bridge and say, we want to start walking along this journey, there is that stand for something great step, which is, an intersection of a human ideal, a change that people want to see brought about in the world that's relevant to the expertise and assets and influence of your organization. The intersection of those 3 places is generally going to yield that great unifying, galvanizing purpose for your organization. And then, behind each of these 12 tiles, and prove it in everything you say and do, is real work. And you can measure this social momentum. So, if you put companies on a continuum for, the left-hand side of this continuum would be, you're actually actively currently experiencing negative social momentum. You've got a stakeholder group or multiple stakeholder groups, or the general public kind of not liking the force you are in society. You could be there, or you can be sort of progressing along this continuum past utility and trust, belief and belonging, all the way to care and contribution, which is the place to get to. And so just, as we start to summarize this, there is an evolution of competitiveness that we're very much in the midst of. And organizations and leaders, as we look for that new playbook, the new goalposts are, you need to earn the benefits of relationship. We use the word relationship a lot in business in our sort of current and past era. We had customer relationship management. We use the word relationship a lot, but really our behavior was more about the expectation of the benefits of relationship rather than earning it. And, as this power shift occurs, we need to earn the relationships with our stakeholders that yield benefits. And so really the evolution of competitiveness is shifting really from, if you look at the strategy tools of our past era, they were, for the most part, let's call them control-based. Like, how can our company exert or gain control over aspects of our value chain. So whether it's power over competitors, erecting barriers to new entrants, consolidating power to ourselves, control over suppliers, getting customers so we increase our share of wallet. How do we ensure our customers can't spend elsewhere? Threat of substitutes. Externalities were, I would say a very broad attempt to say, look, if there are things that we can, that are cost-based that we can push outside of the company and say someone else is responsible, we're going to do that. And we really celebrated a leader that was a good operator, right? So if we just say, that was the method of competitiveness, or the overall strategy to competitiveness in our old way, this new way. And we do have, a deeply human word in the title of this, devotion-based competitiveness, because it is important that, when you say people want to know what you care about, for the most part, like companies and corporations, like we worked for a large heavy industry company a couple of years ago, and they jokingly said, we used to be able to say no comment in 50 different languages. That was our approach to, stakeholder engagement. And we just can't do that anymore. But the reason we have this, I'd say very human and probably a little, might feel a little warm and fuzzy, but devotion-based competitiveness, that's what we're hoping to earn from our stakeholders, right? But we can't expect it. And so, what are those things that can actually start to drive an organization so that the great competitive advantage is you have more people cheering for you to win. You have customers, allies, vendors, media, even regulators that are saying, I love what that company stands for. I love the way they do this, that, and the other thing. And I love that they seem to be making the world a tiny bit better, or maybe even really better. How can I help? How can I be a part of that? And so we have these 5 factors that drive to that. 3 of them, as you'll notice, are kind of gray shade to green. And it's because they're necessary, but they're going to become, call it the table stakes, or they're just going to become cost of entry to the next way to win. Because for the most part, they're corrections of our past way of doing business. So like when you think about trusted to deliver the value proposition, whether it's, cost of goods reduction or headcount reduction, but it's possible that the value propositions that we were saying we were going to deliver, maybe we haven't been doing as good a job of that as need be. And so there needs to be a correction there. When it comes to mutual value, and if you think about, some of the language that we used with employees and with staff in our workforce, right? Like, you're lucky to have a paycheck, or if you're not going to get in the boat, get the blank out of the boat, right? Like we didn't really have a sense of, hey, let's do something great together, right? Like as much as we use the terms win-win in negotiations, because companies had almost all the power, those win-win relationships were generally company gets the capital W win and stakeholder gets a very small W win, or doesn't even get a win at all. So how do we actually get to mutual value with all stakeholders? Again, that's not a point of advantage. We're just going to need to start to embrace that way of thinking. And those things that we externalized, we just can't anymore, right? So like ESG, environment and social and governance, these subjects that are, there are new ones today, but guaranteed there are going to be more to come. And really what they're saying is companies can no longer externalize these social and environmental costs. You need to make them your own. So those first 3 are necessary first steps. Like you can't get to enthusiasm. You can't get to people going to, oh my gosh, what an awesome company that is, unless you're actually doing a good job of those first 3 components. And then the thing that we spent much more time talking about today is, these fully green circles, which are your points of advantage. Those are the things that are wildly differentiated, because it's rather impossible, as Herb Kelleher suggested, for a company to come along and say, hey, I see that my competitor being a force for that change people want to see in the world. I'm going to be a force for that exact change. Like people, first of all, tough for them to see, tough for them to sort of observe and replicate. But by the time you've created a social momentum for something, it's rather impossible to keep up. And that fire of a founder, the leader really, really does matter. And a leadership group really, really does matter in this construct in a way it didn't before. And so for, boards of directors who, one of the chief responsibilities of boards is the next CEO. And so like this fire of a founder characteristic, of course, we do need good operators, right? Like it's not as though we're going to throw out all the good things from our past way of running businesses. So you, of course, need a good operator mentality, but we also need this fire of a founder in our next generation of CEOs. The important thing is, as much as this may feel like, it's not about operational effectiveness, it's not in a linear way about, value creation. It's about human beings, but that doesn't mean it's not measurable. Like when you look at the value human beings contribute to organizations, it is very specific and very measurable. And we've just listed a couple of the things that you can see on the right-hand side that you can increase the contribution that stakeholders make to your organization, and it increases the economic value, and maybe even more importantly, increases the momentum and competitiveness of your organization, because you have, instead of every day having to, add to the momentum of your organization through, incentives to acquire people or sort of buying loyalty, you actually have people creating momentum for your organization instead of you needing to manufacture that every day. So if we just summarize this next way to win, how do you reimagine your organization to be one of these companies for the people? It does start to say, okay, so what these, 4 key drivers of organizations, strategy starts to shift from the controlling of market forces to how do we increase the contribution of our stakeholders? How do we actually make them, or not make them, but how do we create an environment where they want to contribute to the success of our organization? Culture, famously, culture eats strategy for breakfast, but, our approach to culture has been very hit and miss, and largely regarded as an internal exercise. Really what these companies that have created social movements, the culture they're looking to create goes well beyond their organization. They create culture for society. They create an idealism that all stakeholders can get behind. So that's a tremendous shift in an approach to culture. Innovation moves from, call it market opportunity assessment to, let's look at a stakeholder group. How can we, encourage or earn a next level of enthusiasm from that stakeholder group? It creates a very different lens for innovation. If you enjoy, call it the great asset of, one of these organizations that we referenced before, for Starbucks innovations programs or brainstormings to start with, okay, how do we nurture and inspire the human spirit? Lends itself to innovation and inspires new ideas in a way that how do we sell more coffee absolutely does not. And then governance, boards have been regarded as the conscience of companies. Like that has been a term we've used for a long, long time. And this new way of looking at companies as companies for the people, and specifically the idealism and values and beliefs that support it, underlie it, what that ought to do is guide into existence a very explicit conscience that goes well beyond sort of risk mitigation and financial performance as a role for a board to, truly being an explicit conscience that guides all aspects of corporate conduct and stakeholder value creation. And so just as a parting thought, right, like the ultimate competitive advantage is when people want you to win, you become very hard to beat. And I'd say like in this point in time too, there is a companion risk that if people don't want you to win, they can put you out of business in a way they couldn't even 6+ years ago. So I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to turn it back to Todd. I'm not sure if any questions came up in the chat.
Mike, what a wonderful articulation of the new reality of competitive advantage. Particularly looking at the chat comments, it seemed to really resonate with our viewers. I'm going to take you back to your operational roadmap, and your definition of the evolution of competitiveness. If listeners and viewers today want to, at the next staff meeting, put on the agenda devotion-based competitiveness, what would your recommendation be on how they might prepare for that and how they might get a conversation, an authentic conversation going with their staff or their board of directors?
So that authenticity word that we referenced, that's it, right? Like one of the worst bits of advice I could offer you is here's a script to follow. If as a leader, you want to see your organization reimagined as a company for the people, if you as a leader want your company to be something that actually stops expecting the benefits of relationships with its stakeholders, but wants to start earning it, that's the best place. Like, just actually tell your staff you're interested in starting your company along a different path.
Mike, that's really good advice, and I like how you differentiated expectation of return on relationships versus earning the benefits of those relationships. I'm going to ask the same question, but I'm going to ask it a different way, Mike, because this has come in. Here's a little bit more specificity to the question. A question that's come in from the chat. What do you think the first steps are in changing the old guard mentality? And we've all experienced that in the past, to the new relevant realities. Any specific tips on changing the old guard mentality?
Yeah. So, and this isn't my pattern, but it's a bit of a time-honored change management pattern. So the first, like, you do need to build that case for change. So like the first couple of slides, those chasm slides, it's quite necessary to call it the fierce urgency of now feeling. Like, we don't actually have a choice. The old way is dead. So like step number one is you need to actually kill the status quo. Step two is don't rush to an answer. Let people mull around in a neutral zone where they actually don't know what the future looks like. They don't know what the pattern is, but just let them, allow them to grieve, essentially. And then the third step is start to inspire individuals to think of ways that it can be done differently, which is, I would say it's largely this presentation we went through today. Those are those three steps all kind of bundled into it.
Mike, that's there's beauty in simplicity, and your presentation today has really distilled down the steps that people need to make. I want to make sure I captured that third one. The steps that you recommended was acknowledge that there is a fierce urgency of now. I like how you've characterized that, and then recognizing that there's a speed limit to change. Let them grieve. I think you used the word grieve, or maybe marinate in the chasms, and don't rush that. And then your third point, Mike, could you repeat that again, please?
So that's when you start to show people sort of a path to a good life or a better world, right? So really you want to answer two questions in that third phase. Here, inspire people with a destination. This is where I think we could go, and this is why I think it's a good idea to get there, right? Oftentimes as business people, and especially as good operators, we want to rush to how are we going to get there? And we spend a lot of time on the detail of how. Like, the best thing leaders can do is inspiring picture of where we want to go and clear human motivation for why it's worth us coming together to get there together. And then leave the answering of how to managers and leaders and others to answer, because that's where they're going to get their own sort of personal sense of worth and value.
Yeah.
Did that answer your question, Todd?
Yeah, you absolutely did. Yeah, and thanks for this, because the questions are very similar that are coming in, but also very specific, and relevant questions deserve relevant answers. And you certainly have given that fierce urgency of now. Acknowledge the chasms, let them marinate in it, show them a pattern, show them a path, but another important point that you made there, let them come up with the solutions and ideas once you have set that framework. Mike, this has been a tremendous presentation today. Again, you've taken the uncertainty that many are feeling, the complexity of the chasms, the waves of change that are happening, the ambiguity is the word. I can't even say it. I'm so overwhelmed by the waves of change. You've taken this overwhelming feeling and pointed us in a way, shown us a pattern, a flow that fits with the pain points that we're experiencing in our organizations today, and you backed it up with your surveys to 20,000 people, 20 different countries. This was a tremendous presentation, and I'm just scanning the chats here now. We've got lots of requests for your presentation, and thank you so much for your very succinct presentation here today. It was very well done. Any parting comments at all for us, Mike, before we wrap things up?
Well, so Todd, it's going to seem like unabashed self-interest, but there is a variable which I'm, somewhat loath to put into print in the presentation. But getting to a mountaintop, it's really helpful to have a Sherpa, to have someone who actually knows the way. And our standard bunch of advisors that we generally haven't, like, there is no professional services firm that helped Nike, Apple, Starbucks, Southwest Airlines, Patagonia. There is no ad agency, PR firm, management consultant that helped. They had a founder, right? They had someone who did it. But if you actually are a professional CEO and that founder's fire isn't naturally in you, you actually need to have a Sherpa that actually can help get that out of you and help lead you up through the 4 base camps to the top. So anyway, I hope you don't mind me mentioning that.
No,
it's a factor.
Yeah. You're absolutely right, because when we are dealing with all of these waves of change, it's too easy to be hesitant. It's too easy to be paralyzed. And you use the word Sherpa. Sometimes you have to go outside to get started and to have some guidance and it's not going to be perfect the first time when you try this stuff, but nonetheless, it's important to start. So yes, certainly we will share your contact information, Mike, Manager of Risk Advisory for Deloitte. Yes, your Isaac system may be just the ticket that people need in order to get started and to move toward earning the benefits of a purpose-driven company. Thank you so much, Mike, for today. If you enjoyed today, we have recorded it. It will be on bramptonbot.com. And I want you to mark your calendars as well. There are so many talented people at Deloitte. They've been a strong supporter of the Brampton Board of Trade, its economic development initiatives, its advocacy initiatives. They were a strong sponsor and have been for the last 4 years of Canada's Innovation Corridor Summit, which we wrapped up just last month. If you're interested in learning and meeting more folks from Deloitte, put in your calendars October 15th. We're inviting Conrad Frank back to our podium. He'll be speaking on automation. So practical tips as part of our expert series on things that you can do to automate some of the process, to take advantage of the technological opportunities, new technologies that might enhance productivity and ease pain points for your operations. On October 18th, we will be kicking off Small Business Week with Sean Rath. Sean is a newcomer, I guess a revisitor to the Brampton area. He is with the Business Development Bank of Canada, and he comes back now as the manager of the branch here in BDC. And he'll be talking about some specific trends and opportunities that all Canadian entrepreneurs are experiencing, and trends that you might be aware of and how to capture opportunities going forward. So that's October 18th. You can find out more about events that we have at the Brampton Board of Trade by visiting bramptonbot.com. Our news and events sections right on the top, and you can see the full calendar of events. It's an exciting time for Brampton right now, and one of the exciting things is the investment that Ryerson University has been making in our community. And on we have a view from the top. I haven't got the date here. Jennifer, maybe you can put the date in the chat, but our view from the top coming up later this month is with Mohammed Lashmi. He's the Vice Chancellor of Ryerson University, and we'll be discussing health innovation health innovation in Brampton, in particular the future of a Brampton medical school. And that is October 21st at 8 a.m. Thanks so much for that, Jennifer. Ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate your attention here today. And I want to say thank you to all of you that have completed our business confidence survey as well. That deadline is fast approaching. If you haven't completed our survey, please do. It helps us inform governments on what is ahead in your operations, your feelings of confidence on the decisions that they're making, and important insights that you might have about transportation, taxation, transit, talent recruitment. That's our business confidence survey. If you can't find it in your inbox, send us a quick note here. We'll get one to you. But that's a very important activity to help get your voice heard. And the business voice is so important in the quality of life that we enjoy here in Brampton, and bettering that each and every month. So again, Mike Robitaille, thank you so much for your presentation today. Thank you to Deloitte. Thank you to our viewers. I look forward to seeing you again soon at the Brampton Board of Trade. Thanks, everybody.